The relationship between men and mental health has often been called a silent crisis. On this podcast, we're breaking the silence. Welcome to Mental Health. It's time to talk. Here's your host, Allan Kehler.
Welcome, everyone. This is it, episode 1. Thank you so much for taking the time to tune in. And we're going to start off episode 1 with my good friend, mental health advocate and former NHL goaltender, Clint Malarchuk. Clint, welcome to the show.
It's good to be on, especially game show number 1.
Number 1. Clint, is it just me, or every time I see you, does your nose seem a little more straighter?
Oh my God, that would be the first time I've ever heard that in my life. Did you break your nose again, Clint?
Yep.
No, I broke my nose 10 or 11 times now, so that's a real compliment.
Yeah, I mean, Clint, that is impressive. And before we dive into Clint as a person, I want to start off briefly talking about Clint the goalie, because obviously, here's the thing. As an NHL goaltender, I mean, that represents strength. You are the backbone of the team. And I'm curious, Clint, how did that position tie into the potential silence when you were struggling with your mental illness?
Well, there's always that question, because goaltenders are known as being goofy or flaky or off the wall. And what attracts that position? Is it that goofy personality, or does becoming a goaltender make you a goofy personality because of the pressure? And, having struggled with mental illness, even as a kid, I always thought I was mentally weak. And now in retrospect, looking back on my life, having to be in that pressure-packed position, handling, especially at the NHL level, the pressures and everything, but also handling mental illness and doing it in silence because of the stigma. You're supposed to be the backbone, the tough guy, the mentally tough guy. And now I look back and I go, you know what? I'm kind of proud that I was able to persevere through the pressures of the NHL and struggle and survive through the mental illness that I went through.
And Clint, at what point would you say that you were able to actually make that pivot? Like, when were you able to actually realize, okay, hang on, this is not so much a weakness as perhaps it is a strength to talk about?
Well, it came later in life, obviously, because, and again, we talk about the stigma all the time because of, especially with men and mental health, it's such a stigma that we're supposed to be the macho guys, the tough guys, and push through. And so I would say later on, again, in retrospect, I look back and I go, wow, I must have been double tough to handle both those deals. For me, I didn't feel normal as a kid. I didn't feel normal as a teenager. I felt, anxiety ridden. But the thing is, I had it so young that I had nothing to, what is normal? What is normal? I didn't know. Were other kids anxious like me? Were they depressed like me? Did they have obsessive compulsive disorder like me, but they hid it like I did? And maybe that was normal. So I didn't really have a gauge until later in life, probably after my accident in 1989 when I almost died, cutting my jugular vein in the NHL game, where things exploded and really the OCD became enormous, the depression, the anxiety, the panic attacks, the nightmares, the flashbacks, and of course the undiagnosed PTSD that went along with that injury. That's where I really started to think, wow, you're a screwed up dude.
Well, I guess I just find it interesting, Clint. You think about the proverbial mask as a goalie, and you did spend so many years, questioning the normality and perhaps hiding in those shadows. And obviously, a mask serves a purpose, right? Like sometimes we have to wear the mask, but even now, how do you, or how are you able to, take off the mask and actually do some of the work? Or do you still struggle with that?
Well, I still struggle with it. Nowhere deep as I used to. Ironically, you can see all my hockey masks hanging above my head in the background. Those were all masks that I wore as an NHL goaltender and as a kid, and all that. So the proverbial mask that came off, I think, again, it goes back to after my accident, almost dying, the trauma that went with it. All the rumors, that were out there that maybe I was a drug addict because I was in the hospital, and I had overdosed on some painkillers and alcohol, not on purpose. It was an accidental overdose at that time. And I think that's when I first got diagnosed with any mental disorders. And I came clean because I didn't want to be known as a drug user, or somebody that was out there, especially as a professional athlete. You want to set an example for kids. So that's when I really went clean, and started to do interviews, newspaper, TV, all those things, because all of a sudden they have this athlete, and I was one of the first to come out with these type of disorders, way back in 1990. And so that's how I kind of got out there as far as being known as somebody that struggled with mental illness.
Yeah, I mean, Clint, you really paved the way for not only athletes, but a lot of people, men in particular, to realize, maybe it's okay to talk about some of my challenges. And what was some of the feedback for you when you finally allowed yourself to just say it how it was?
Ironically and unbelievably, it was pretty emotional, supportive.
Mm,
I have very little, and especially after I wrote my book, that's where I really went, wow, there's a lot of Clint Malarchuks out there. I
mm.
knew I struggled. I knew there was other people that struggled, but then again, we go, they're not as bad as me. No one's as bad as me. Yeah, I guess there's people bad, but not as bad as me. And when I got the feedback from people that had read my book, or read an article, or seen an interview, and totally related, went, wow, you're a twin. Your life has been a double of mine. Yet, like so many of us, we do it in silence and in darkness. And that's when my eyes were really opened, that there were so many men, especially men. We're talking men mostly here because of the theme. And that's when I went, oh, there's a lot. A lot of people opened up. I got tons of emails, messengers, all sorts of letters, cards. And it was, for a lot of people, I think it was the first time that they heard somebody tell a story that they could relate to. And again, I use that suffering in darkness and in silence. And again, it's because of the stigma, and especially for men. And we can talk about how it is for men. It's hard for us, and especially when you're an athlete, and you're supposed to be, like for me, an NHL goaltender, you're supposed to be the tough guy, the one that handles the pressure, that can handle the win or the lose, to win or lose a game. The pressure is more on the goaltender than in any other sport.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, vulnerability breeds vulnerability, doesn't it? And how many times don't you hear those two powerful words where after you're on a stage or people read your book and they just say, me too, me too. But then how is it, Clint, that we can help curve some of that, those old scripts? Like, how can we help redefine what it is to be strong?
Well, I think that word vulnerability is huge. I get a lot of like when I first came out, let's say come out of the closet, or come out with your disorders and your problems. My first thought was fear, a lot of fear. A lot of people are going to judge me. People are going to think that I'm weak, rather than sick. So there was a lot of fear and trepidation. And again, it was the opposite. It was the opposite of that, because again, so many men, and I talk about men up in your region in Saskatchewan, a farming community, a lot of isolation with farming, and there's a lot of suicide rates, not just from farmers by any means, but with men. And it's becoming more and more almost epidemic. And I'm sure this COVID deal has a lot to do with it too. And but people are realizing that they're not alone. And being a man doesn't necessarily mean having to be that tough guy. I mean, I'll tell you one thing, Allan. I've had many surgeries, being an athlete, rodeo, hockey, boxing, hockey, of course, a lot of injuries, a lot of surgeries. I know physical pain. And I was quoted once on the National up in Canada, the big TV show, and I remember saying, I'd rather have my throat cut 100 times over than live with mental illness. And I remember the lady that, she's quite famous. I can't remember her name. You'd know her right off the bat. Manley. I can't. It doesn't matter. She was almost sat back in her chair, and she kind of went. She rephrased the question, and I said, "Yeah, the only way I can describe mental illness to people that don't know how it feels is it is more painful than any physical pain that I've endured in my life. It is that painful. And the problem is it's an invisible disease, and it's also got that stigma. Whereas physical pain with men, wow, you break a leg, ooh, gee, that hurts. We all know physical pain. We all have it. But the invisibility of mental, struggling, whether it's depression, anxiety, I have a obsessive compulsive disorder, panic attacks, flashbacks. And then I went 20 years of undiagnosed PTSD, which led to a suicide attempt. That's how deep and dark I have been. And why do we do that? Why do we do that in silence? And it's a stigma for sure. And the being perceived as weak. And as men, we don't want to be that. We want to be we want to be the guy in every sense of the word.
Yeah, it is definitely easier to manage and address physical pain than emotional pain. And yet, like anything, unless you've gone through it, it's very difficult to understand. But I think, Clint, one of the things that I admire the most about you is you are you. There is no more hiding today. And I can go back to an event that we were doing together. I don't know if it was in Ontario, but I just remember you were really struggling with your mental health that day, and the show has to go on. And I saw you sitting on a chair in the hallway, and my heart just really hurt because you're tearing up. And when you went on the stage, you don't shy away from the fact that this is a tough day. You're able to just put a face and a voice to it, and this is real. And I think, again, that lends to the vulnerability piece. And that's what I love about you, Clint. You're always just your authentic self. And I find that a lot of men in particular really struggle being comfortable when they're in emotional pain.
Well, yeah, that's true. And in a lot of my if I'm in one of those states that I'm not having a good day and I have to go up and perform and give a talk, and I'm not really in a good space at that time, I do have my tools. I try to meditate. I try to breathe and everything. But I when I'm in those states that I feel like I might crack a little bit on stage, I'll tell people right off the bat. I'll tell them, I'd say, today's not a good day for me. I'm a little bit struggling. And if the waterworks come on, I will not apologize. I will never apologize for being emotional. and because it's real,
Yeah.
and we got to be real about it. And the opposite of real is phony. And if I go up there and be phony, yeah, I gotta pull myself through to get through a presentation, but I'm still going to be authentic. I'm going to be real. And I would say I choke up in probably 85% of my presentations, because there's parts that I touch, talking about my life and things that have happened to me as a kid, through life, through mental illness, through PTSD, through a suicide attempt, and they're real and they're emotional, but they're real. And to back down from that is the opposite of being real, and that's being phony. And I don't want to be a phony.
Well, and you aren't. And I think that, Clint, you understand that emotions are energy. And when those emotions rise to the surface, you allow them to spill over. You allow yourself to feel. And going back to men, I think that right there is a massive hurdle. And then if you suppress those emotions, which a lot of men do, and it manifests, then it turns often into anger. And I mean, Clint, in your book, which is a phenomenal read, which I'll get to later, it's time and time again, there are stories of raw anger where it just seems like all this energy's in there. You don't know how to manage it. So what do? We project. And how is it then that you were able to look at some of your emotions, look at some of your pain?
Oh boy, Allan, a lot of self-analysis, a lot of therapy, a lot of counseling, a lot of self-medicating. You go through a gamut of things, and I think that's why there's such a huge correlation between addiction and mental illness, is because I can say for me, I used to drink beer to calm myself down if I was anxious, or if I'm depressed, it would pick me up. My obsessive compulsive disorder, beer would kind of level me out. But the problem with that is now you're getting into a whole new can of worms. And it's what one beer would do, then it took two, then it was four, then it was eight. Before you know it, I'm drinking 20, 30 beers a day. But that's American beer, and I'm Canadian, so
Big difference.
big difference, right? No, but that's why it's such so getting back to kind of where you're going is, we do have these things of anger. I know, dealing with a lot of military guys and gals, that strongest, mentally toughest people in the world to do that job. And they go overseas and they come back and they got PTSD. And, they're the toughest people in the world. So right there, it doesn't matter how tough you are. It's an illness, an injury, mental injury. I mean, like PTSD, and what I've learned through them, speaking with them, is, yeah, we could all, with PTSD, we could all understand a certain amount of depression, certain amount of anxiety, a certain amount of other manifestations, maybe OCD or whatever. But the common denominator that I found that we all had was anger. And this is my own theory, is that anger comes from, we're not able to manage our own emotions and feelings. B, we're a man, we should be able to handle this stuff. And when you don't have control of your own, maybe thoughts, feelings, emotions, depressions, anxieties, it manifests into just nothing but anger. Like, what am I doing? And for me, that's when the beer came in, trying to calm down or numb myself. And I know there's a lot of men that can relate to that, a lot. And it's not a good road to go down by any means, because now you're dealing with two devils. And
yeah, you say it well. I mean, anger for me, I guess in hindsight, it's this secondary emotion, isn't it? Where I really had to start thinking about what lies beneath the anger. And for me, I mean, a lot of it was just this pain that I didn't want to look at. It was sadness. But like you, alcohol became something that I would turn to just to numb, to escape. And right there, as you say, is part of the problem, because alcohol is seen as socially accepted or acceptable, especially for men. And yet somehow, though, as we already talked about, you were able to get to a point where you realized, okay, this is not working. And Clint, when it comes to alcohol and you, when did you have that revelation that you're like, something has got to change?
Well, I battled alcohol off and on my whole life. I've had relapses, just to understand that, and just going back to what you say, drinking beer is almost like part of being a man, right?
Right.
That, which is, ridiculous, but it's part of our social thinking. And for me, I think, when I was, I was near my suicidal time, and I was drinking a lot. I was drinking, I wasn't sleeping, I was drinking, and I was just trying to kill pain. I was trying to, and I knew I had a problem for sure. But that's when I really realized that I had totally lost control of not just my mental health, my suicidal thinking, but also I needed alcohol to function. I was dependent. I was dependent on it, and it just became a self-medication. And for me to actually address that, it was after the suicide attempt that that I had to really, I went to treatment, had to work on a lot of my mental health issues also, but I was also a full-blown alcoholic at that time, and had to deal with that too.
Right. I mean, at the end of the day, some would argue that it's not necessarily that we had an alcohol problem as much as a living problem, right? Because to recover, we got to look at some of this. And Clint, I just want to address this book briefly, because for anybody tuning in right now visually, this book, Crazy Game by Clint Malarchuk, phenomenal read. And for everybody tuning in later on the podcast, I would highly recommend checking out that book by Clint Malarchuk. One of the things, you're talking about the suicide, Clint, and what stuck out for me is there is a moment where Joni, your wife, goes back to that place where you did pull the trigger, and she finds a tooth. She finds your tooth, and there's a piece where she thinks, maybe things can become whole again. How has that process been for you, trying to become whole?
Well, that part it's a daily battle. I do have my good days, my bad days, of course. I have a kind of a daily routine. Obviously, I know a lot of people are anti-medication, but I take medication because I don't like the alternative. The alternative is not good. The alternative didn't turn out too good. So meditation has been a part of my my go-to as well. Counseling. If I need to go to a counselor, I go to a counselor. Not that I need to go to one all the time, but if I feel like I'm sliding downhill, I'll go to a counselor. I recently, it's been a year, I started to have flashbacks of the skate cutting my throat again, and sitting straight up in bed and everything. So I did a thing called, I immediately went for help. And this is only a year and a half ago now. I did a thing called EMDR, eye movement desensitization reprocessing. It's scientifically proven, something left, right with the eye movement, and walking to some kind of talk therapy and that. And it helped. It got me through it. So counseling is still, there if I need it. What? And I know you're going to relate to this 100%. My biggest go-to help for Clint Malarchuk is being of service, speaking about my life, speaking about my vulnerability, my downest and darkest of times. You know, and when you're a professional speaker like I am and an author like I am, so you know what it's like to reach people and to have them come up and hug you. A man even crying for the first time in his life, he's actually going, wow, somebody else gets it. Somebody's like me. I'm not the only one. That being of service is the hugest thing. And I realized this is before COVID and everything. On a speaking circuit like you and I are, usually July and August get a little slow. The conventions aren't out there. And I noticed August, I started to get into a depression again. And I was like, why? And I kind of thought about it. And it was because I hadn't spoke much in July and August was dead. And I wasn't getting my 12 step, I guess, my being of service. And that's why I felt like I was sliding back down, because I wasn't out there doing what I believe, I should have been dead 3 times now. And I believe, and I say this all the time, God spared me for those that are still suffering. So that's why I like that being of service, because I feel like that's why I am alive. That's why God spared me. That's why God gave me the vulnerability to do what I did, to write that book, and I mean, I threw everything out in that book. I mean, it's pretty raw. I even told about my insecurities, everything. And it was the hardest thing I ever did, Allan. Yeah, I played in the NHL. That must have been pretty tough. That book was the hardest thing I ever did in my life, but it's also the most gratifying thing that I've ever done.
Yeah, that makes good sense, Clint. I mean, risk and reward, isn't it? And I mean, I've heard you speak many times, and you always say you don't feel like your purpose here was to be an NHL goaltender. And you said it yourself, right? It's to carry a message. And
Well,
I don't know, like, do you sometimes find it's this double-edged sword? Because I find life really hard. I find life very rewarding and gratifying, but I also find it hard. And while I would say this is redemption, that we're able to still be alive after the life that we've led, but how do you navigate through that? Do you have bitterness sometimes? Do you just accept, hey, this is what it is, I'm going to make the best of it?
The bitterness part, I've had people say, like Kelly Root, a good friend of mine, said I had the most talent, and we grew up together, and that I was the best goalie, blah blah blah. I sure didn't feel like it, but I made it to the NHL, and sometimes I'm like, boy, how good could I have been had I not had mental illness? But then I'm just grateful I made it to the NHL with mental illness. So I feel like, the NHL did give me a platform. There's a line that, kind of success, but there's also that parallel line of the demons, the mental illness, the depression, the anxiety. I'm in the NHL. I have the world by the tail. I should be the happiest guy in the world, yet I'm struggling with anxiety and depression. And so I had these 2 lines, one of kind of demons and one of kind of success. And now I know why I had the demons and why God gave me the platform of the NHL. Is the top is to be of service, to be where I am. Because what am I going to speak about? Yeah, I played in the NHL, but had I not gone through, what would I speak to people about? I speak to people that are suffering in darkness and silence. I had to go through that darkness and silence to know what the hell I'm talking about, to know that, to have that empathy and compassion, and the vulnerability to stand up and tell your story, and have men actually for the first time come to you and say, you know what, I'm going to get help. I'm going to talk to somebody. I'm going to see a doctor. I'm going to talk to my wife about this. And I've had a lot of wives especially come up to me and go, oh my God, you will not believe what you did to my husband. He is actually going to go, because she's lived with him. and seen his struggles. And he's been afraid to go get help because of a lot of reasons: stigma, manhood, the ego thing. And here's one for you. You know what ego stands for, right?
You tell me.
EGO, edging God out.
Okay, there you go.
Well, we try and do it ourselves, right? We're men. We try and do it ourselves. And
Right.
we need a little help from the other side too. Whoever your God or whatever your God might be. So EGO, edging God out. I can't edge God out. And another thing I like to say is when I'm having a bad day, I've lost my contact with my higher power. So I take my 10 minutes or whatever I can afford to meditate and just get reconnected with my higher power. And all of a sudden, things seem to settle down and I'm not overwhelmed and going 100 miles an hour. I kind of turn it over to my higher power a little bit.
Yeah, well said. And there's a question coming in from Mike Cameron, good friend of mine. Great to see you, Mike. Thanks for being on this podcast. So Mike, who, an incredible soul, obviously takes time to meditate. Clint, he's wondering what meditation practice looks like for you.
Well, I love talking about meditation because it scares a lot of people.
Yeah.
Or maybe it doesn't scare, intimidates them a little bit because again, it's not like considered the manly thing either, right?
Right.
But, so meditation started with me. I read a book called The Untethered Soul, and it got me thinking about, how the world goes and we're just a little piece of it. And without going into it, got me into thinking about, meditating. And so there's different forms of meditation. People get intimidated. They think you have to sit cross-legged and go, oh, no, you don't. You don't. You can if you want. But you don't. Sometimes I got this piece of grass in front of my barn that I like to water, and I watch the water coming out of the hose, and it's a form of meditation. The dogs are running around. That's a form of meditation. My meditation usually is settling down. I usually like to lay flat and meditate that way. Try to silence my mind. Something comes in, don't panic. I call it sit in my seat of conscious awareness. I'm conscious of if something comes into my head, I'm conscious. It's but it'll go away. It'll float away. Funny story, which I love to tell, is because my wife is one of those meditation. I can't meditate. I can't sit still long enough. I can't, and a lot of people are like that. They don't think they can settle down long enough just to quiet their mind. And the trick about meditation is you don't try, you just do, and you let it happen. And one day, she goes, I got this little emotional support dog, little Yorkie. And she puts it in his basket in her bicycle, and she puts her earbuds in, and she goes on a bike ride. And one day she pulls in, and I'm out there doing my watering, and I said, "So how was your meditation?" And she looked at me like, "Were you nuts? I don't meditate." And I said, "No, you just that's a form of meditation." Her going on her little bike ride with the dog in the basket, looks like Dorothy on the Wizard of the Oz or something. And she thought about it. And now that's her. She accepts that as part of her form of meditation. So I always try people don't get intimidated by it. It can be any one of a million things. You find out what works. But I think what I've done is I built up a meditation where, like I said, if I'm having a bad day, I take that 10 minutes. I've lost my connection with my higher power, which is basically a meditation in itself. And I'll take that 10 minutes and I'll just get reconnected. And all of a sudden, God's taking care of most of that stuff that I was worrying about. And I'm able to resume my day because I got reconnected.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, I know I have a hard time with that word meditation. I'm trying. Even today I sat on the floor with one of our dogs, a bull mastiff, and I just had my hand on the bull mastiff, and I would just say, "Love lives here." love lives here. And I mean, that's just something new that I'm trying, but what works for one will not work for someone else. But to your
Right.
point, I mean, you just have an open mind, and
And
most
animals can be huge. Animals can be huge meditators. Like I said, I got a little emotional support dog. And it's funny how that dog, when I'm upset, it'll sit on my lap a lot, but when I'm upset, it crawls right up on my shoulder and will rest across there. It can sense when I'm not into a good spot. And so meditation, take that word out, meditation, call it energy. Call it energy. There's good energy, there's bad energy. To me, animals give me good energy. I like to feed my horses, and sometimes I'll stand there and you can hear them just grinding away, and they're just in heaven. And it's a very calming, soothing effect for me. And that's a form of meditation. So don't get intimidated by meditation, and animals are huge.
Yeah, no doubt. I totally agree. Clint Sydney is just commenting here. He says, he heard your story when you were in Regina at the Recovery Week Luncheon several years ago. Keep on keeping on. Boy, those words sound like I've heard them before. Thank you, Sydney.
Yeah, that was a great event. I think we went through Regina, Saskatoon, and Prince Albert, and it was a recovery tour, and it was great. It was good.
Just
Uh,
another person that you're impacting. Sorry?
uh, a friend of ours that hosted that one in Regina, Rod Peterson, was the host of that one in Regina. Yeah,
Yeah, he is a good soul.
yes, and he's had his battles, and who hasn't? And he's another guy that is he's a big, strong guy. He's a football commentator, well known in Saskatchewan, and he's not afraid to step out and tell his story.
Well, and that's just it. You think to yourself, how many others are hiding? Because to your point, yeah, a lot of people didn't know Rod's struggles. A lot of people didn't know your struggles. But I think that one of our challenges is we live in our head. We fear. We have these thoughts about what's going to happen if we are vulnerable or if we reach out for help. And you said it yourself, Clint, early on, there was not so much judgment as there was compassion. And I'm finding that the more men that I talk to, when they're actually able to reach out for help, they are met with extending arms, right? They are embraced. And more importantly, they feel like they no longer have to wear the proverbial mask. They feel free.
Well, I think that the more we talk about it, like I mentioned being of service, and really what we're doing right now is being of service, and it's freedom for you. I know it's freedom for me, and to know that somebody out there is going to listen and go, look at these two donkeys. If they can step out and be vulnerable and get help and try to help others, so can I.
Exactly. And it's, for me, such a large part has been surrounding myself with others who speak my language. And the only reason that you and I ever connected was because we get each other, to know that I can pick up the phone and call you, or you call me, and we're just there for each other. I really struggle with shame. And I know that that's one word for you, Clint, that one has the ability to just be really difficult to navigate through. But talking, right? Silence doesn't work. So I love the fact that you are able to just put a voice to what's going on.
Well, that I always use I don't just use shame and guilt. See, when I grew up as a kid, um, all my self-worth was, if I had a good hockey game as a kid, I was a good kid. If I had a bad hockey game, I was a bad kid. Now
Right.
that's very, very sick thinking, right? But that's the household I grew up in. I had an abusive alcoholic father, and I don't want to knock him because he was a great guy, but alcohol changes people. But so my default mode now, even today, is I make a mistake, I go to shame and I go to guilt. And it's because that's where I grew up. As uncomfortable as shame and guilt is for Clint Malarchuk, It's my default mode because that's where I grew up. I grew up with that gut wrenching, knot in the stomach, and so now I have to just tell myself, do the next right thing, do the next right thing, do the next right thing, and that's what I try to do. And sometimes I walk around the house and I'm mumbling, blah, blah, blah. What are you saying? I'm nothing. I'm just saying, do the next right thing. But I have to drill it in because it's so ingrained in me as a child.
Yeah, and I guess in a way, we just go to what we know, don't we? I mean, if shame is what we used to live in, it's a natural place to visit.
Yeah.
Clint, Dana made a beautiful comment. She just says, "Thank you both for sharing your vulnerability and truth. Freedom equals awareness, vulnerability, fear, pain, and resiliency." And she heard you speak as well in Saskatoon. You have an amazing message. Yes, you do, my friend. And Fran also chimed in saying, yes, so can I. And that's exactly it. You can, Fran. I mean, I know that you're in the process of writing your story. And Clint, I think that's part of it too. Writing that book, as you've said in the past, was the hardest thing that you've ever done, but also the most rewarding. And I always encourage people to just write their story, not for the sake of necessarily publishing,
Right.
but just for the sake of looking inward. And I mean, one of the things I love about you is you've said, I mean, you are here to serve. And anybody who has ever reached out to you, you respond. And I know that now you're also trying to become a life coach. How's that going?
That's going pretty good. In fact, I think I'm going to take my final exam today.
Woo!
I know I've been fighting this COVID thing, and it's been tough. It's been hard to concentrate and everything, but I think today I'm gonna finally write my final. So hopefully, I hope I don't know how I'm gonna do, but I hope I do well because I want to be, because I'm like you. You and I have very, very similar paths, and we do the same sort of things out there for people, and I want to be like Allan. So I want to be a life coach too.
Well, good luck on that test. Our friend Tom chimes in. Hello, thank you for continuing to share your message of hope and honesty. And wow, yeah, hope. Hope is a big thing, Tom. Thank you. And Travis, again, thanks for sharing your experience. It's valuable, something I wish everyone could do. Clint, one of the things for me that just threw me, this was maybe 2 years ago. We're talking on the phone. I don't know, maybe we talked 3 or 4 times before. And then as the conversation comes to an end, you say, "I love you." And, at the time I was like, oh,
Where'd that come from?
it threw me. And here's the thing. There's only one other guy in my life, one other friend that I ever said, "I love you" to, and I felt it and I was comfortable with it. And that was my best friend, Justin, who died by suicide. And when you said that, I mean, it hit me, and even now, like it hits me. And those are very powerful words. But why is it that as men, we have a hard time saying those words to other men?
Well, I think we just grew up that way. I mean, it's like the old how some of these stigmas started. I mean, remember like crying. I remember as a boy, if your feelings were hurt, okay, if you got hurt and you were crying, okay, all right, cry, knock it off, right? But if you're crying out of hurt feelings, the old man will, "I'll give you something to cry about." So what is the message there? The message is you don't cry, especially over hurt feelings or spilt milk. And so we grew up with these messages, as small of a message that is, but there's thousands of them out there that we grew up with. So it becomes that toughness part again. It's part of the stigma again. And it's just something that I think that it can be an overused word. It can be an underused word. It can mean so many different ways. Like I love Allan Kehler. Do I want to marry you? No. But I love you. And so it's different. We've got a mutual friend listening in here, and you don't know him as well as I do, but I love him dearly as a friend. And I know when you get to know him, well, he's pumping in here right now. You're going to love Chuck. You're going to love him because he's that type of guy. And it's easy to love people that do good things and try to help people. And Chuck's one of those guys. You're one of those guys. I'm one of those guys. And it just becomes easy. I've got another friend. I think he's listening in. I don't know. He's not that technical, so he might not figure it out. But he has gone through hell and back with me. I write about him a lot in my book, and he stuck by me through thick and thin. And he's the guy that the town that they tried to get me on a helicopter, a life flight, because I had a bullet in my head and I was still conscious. And the dog catcher, I think, got a hold of him on the radio and said, you got to get this guy in a helicopter because he ain't going. You're the only guy that'll get him on that machine. And he's another guy I can say I love you to. And he's a big burly veterinarian guy. He's a man's man. He's a rancher guy, and he has no problem saying he loves me either. And I love his family. He loves my family.
Yeah, that's pretty neat. Thanks for sharing. And Clint, to Dana's point, says you've already been a life coach without maybe knowing it. And that's true. I mean, once you pass this test today, yes, you'll get some papers, but man, you're already a coach.
Well, that we're talking about Chuck. He's kind of my partner, and you're coming into kind of partnership with us too on trying to help men. And he's saying you're doing this anyways. You're always on the phone. My wife used to say, Clint, you're in the barn. You're on the phone for 2 hours. Who the heck you talking to? I say, I don't know who it is, but they need support. They need love. They need whatever. And so I figured I might as well, I'm doing it anyways. I might as well know exactly how to do it.
Yeah, you have a massive heart. You are a bright light in a sometimes dark world, and I appreciate you. To Cindy's point, you're doing God's work. There is something larger at play when I go back and think about, even for myself, why I'm still here, and clearly for you, Clint, that resonates. I want to wind things up here soon, but I know that there's a few people who are tuning in live, and by all means, if you have any questions for Clint, I would open it up. Feel free to ask any questions, and I will address them. Clint, I know that for you, teams, being on a team and being with the team is key. And I think it was back in 2014 when you were about to enter into rehab again, and Joni, a great soul, your wife, said, "Hey, just remember, we're a team." Like, how important is it for you to have that support around you?
Well, we can't do it alone. I mean, you need support. That's why it breaks my heart when I do hear stories of people that don't understand or don't empathize too well with what a person is going through. And that's kind of why I use that analogy that people don't understand mental illness or addiction. Just understand that it is painful. And, you can't judge something that you haven't gone through yourself. And just to know that that person is in pain and they can't do it themselves. They need the help. They need the support. And you don't always know what to say. In fact, usually you don't know what to say. It's your actions. It's showing up. It's the support that you give, because it's hard to know what to say unless you've walked a mile in our shoes.
Right. And I think that's actually where sometimes people run into a brick wall where they're not sure what to say. So either A, they're silent, but silence isn't the answer. But I think if we can understand, it's not our job to ever fix someone, but if we can take the time to listen, and to your point, show compassion, show them some resources, but also understand that it's up to them whether or not they act on those resources. And Dean must have read the book. Says thanks for sharing your story in the book. And actually, by the way, Clint, I know that Mike has already ordered the book from Amazon just a few minutes ago. So hey, we're moving the right direction.
Well, which book? I mean, what do you have? 5 out now?
You know what's crazy, Clint? We talk about shame, right? And the last book that I wrote on men and mental health was the first time that I felt a little bit of pride, because those first few, it had to do with the value. Who the hell am I to write a book? But it's slowly coming into my own and moving through the shame. Like, do you find that you can be moving along in life, everything's good, and then all of a sudden, boom, that shame just grabs you and pulls you back?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you one thing. When I wrote my book, I put everything out there. I mean, everything. I thought, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it right. I don't give a damn. And then right a week before it was supposed to be out on the bookshelves, I had a total panic attack meltdown. I remember I was standing in front of my barn on my cell phone, and I was talking to my co-author, and I was crying. And I was like, oh my God, what did I do? I've just opened up the whole can of worms of Clint Malarchuk's, and and I was shaking, and scared. I had true fear of how the book would be perceived, all the shame and guilt I talked about, all the demons I talked about, all the ups, the downs, and even the funny stories that I put in there. And I was shaking, I was crying, and he settled me down. And after that, it was boom. It was, like I said, the greatest thing I ever did, because I just, the feedback, I could not believe how many people out there struggle. I just could not believe the feedback. And I'm talking, I was getting hundreds of emails a day. And I went, wow, there's a lot of Clint Malarchuks out there. And it's funny. Another thing that I was speaking I was working with the Calgary Flames at the time, and I was speaking with the big psychiatrist, chairman of the board of the Canadian Psychiatric Society. He was speaking, I was speaking, and we thought we got this nailed. We got the guy, the clinical side, and then we got a story, my story, and we thought we nailed this. And they had Q&A after. And a lot of the Calgary Flame players came. I had a great support system. So I introduced them before I spoke. And my wife was in town, so I introduced her too. And so the Q&A, somebody puts up a hand. I have a question, but it's for your wife, Joni. And well, okay. She stood up and answered the question. Another question. I got another question, but it's for your wife, Joni. I'm like, what the hell's going on here? Me and the doctor, I mean, we were pumping fists thinking we got this nailed, and here all the questions were for Joni. But it really got me thinking. There's a lot of Clint Malarchuks out there, but there's a lot of Jonis that live the other side of living with somebody with mental illness and addiction a lot, and we don't hear their story too much. It's always about us, and they go through what they go through. It's just as bad. In fact, it's terrifying, and there's no manual for them.
Yeah, well, when I first saw you and Joni on a stage together, I sat back and I thought, wow, this is powerful, because to your point, I was finally able to see the other side, and I noticed pretty quick how many people were just drawn in, because yeah, a lot of times, Clint, the focus is on us, the ones who are struggling, but what about those who are trying to support us? How do they support us while not getting lost in their journey?
Yeah.
And that is a whole nother conversation, which
A whole nother one.
we'll dive into at some point. You know, Tom says Joni's another angel to the world. So true. Yep.
Tom Pure, he's a Grand Prairie boy. Hi, Tom.
There you go. There you go. And you know, it is a family disease, and it affects everybody. It's that ripple effect, isn't it? But
Yeah.
Clint, I want to wrap this up. I really appreciate your time. Not a lot of people know that you're not feeling so hot. What's going on, by the way, with your health right now?
Well, just that dang COVID got me. It got me, and boy, did it get me good. You know, some people get a little bit, some people get it, you know, full blown, and I pretty much had it full blown. And I think today's the first day I'm just maybe feeling a little bit normal, or as normal as a goalie can get.
Right. Well, and I said, Clint, let's just put this off for a little bit. What do you say? No. Born resilient or be resilient. Okay.
Yeah.
Hey, we pulled it off. I really, really appreciate your time, Clint. I appreciate you as a person. I love you. Thank you so much.
Likewise, love you too, and thanks for having me. I think it went great.
Me too. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for taking the time to tune in to Mental Health. It's time to talk. Keep talking. Be well.